Sometimes the loneliest people aren't the ones who have nobody. They're the ones who have everything except someone to come home to. The rain fell in a soft gray curtain over Greenwood Memorial Cemetery, turning the winding paths into ribbons of dark stone that reflected the cloudy October sky. Most visitors had already gone home. The grounds were nearly empty. Only the distant rustle of oak leaves and the steady patter of rain disturbed the silence. At the far end of the cemetery, beneath a towering maple tree whose leaves had begun to fade from gold to rust, a man sat motionless on a weathered bench facing a white marble headstone. Ethan Caldwell held a paper cup of coffee in one hand. Another cup rested carefully beside the grave. Steam drifted upward from both cups before disappearing into the cold afternoon air. The inscription on the headstone was simple. Abigail Rose Caldwell. Beloved wife. Beloved friend. Forever missed. Ethan stared at the engraved letters without blinking. 3 years. 3 years since the funeral. 3 years since the doctors had stepped quietly into a hospital waiting room and changed the course of his life with a single sentence. Yet somehow the pain still arrived every morning with perfect punctuality. Some wounds didn't heal. They simply learned how to hide until no one was looking. The rain tapped softly against the black umbrella resting beside him. His expensive wool coat was damp at the shoulders. He didn't seem to notice. Across the country, financial news networks discussed Ethan Caldwell almost every day. Business magazines called him a visionary. Investors called him a genius. Competitors called him dangerous. At 41 years old, he had transformed Caldwell Industries into one of the most powerful companies in America. He owned private jets, luxury properties, a penthouse overlooking Manhattan, a ranch in Wyoming, a collection of cars worth more than most neighborhoods. Yet none of those things had followed him to the cemetery. None of them sat beside him now. The only thing sitting beside Ethan Caldwell was absence. He looked down at the second coffee cup. Abigail's favorite, vanilla latte, extra foam. He bought one every Sunday without fail. It had become a ritual he never questioned. Maybe because rituals were easier than acceptance. Maybe because part of him still refused to believe she was gone. He leaned forward slightly and placed his hand against the cold marble. "You would laugh at me if you saw this," he whispered. His voice was rough from disuse. "Buying 2 coffees every week." A faint smile appeared and disappeared almost instantly. "Actually, you'd probably tell me the foam is wrong." The smile faded. The silence returned. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime hanging from a memorial tree rang softly. Ethan lowered his eyes. The world knew him as a billionaire CEO. No one knew about the nights he wandered through a silent house, unable to sleep. No one knew he still kept Abigail's books exactly where she had left them. No one knew he still set 2 plates on the dining table before realizing his mistake. Every room in his mansion was perfectly furnished. Every room felt empty. Every success felt smaller than the one person who wasn't there to witness it. A cold breeze drifted across the cemetery. Ethan pulled his coat tighter. He remembered Abigail's final words more clearly than yesterday's board meeting. "Promise me something, Ethan. Don't turn your grief into a prison. Promise me you'll keep living." He had promised. But promises were easy in hospital rooms. Living was harder, especially when the person who made life feel warm was gone. Ethan closed his eyes. The rain continued falling around him. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Then he heard something unexpected. A child's laughter. Small, bright, completely out of place among the graves and silence. Ethan opened his eyes. The sound came from somewhere behind him. He turned slightly. Through the rain, he noticed a young woman walking carefully along one of the stone paths. A little boy skipped beside her, holding a bouquet of yellow flowers almost as large as his chest. The woman wore a simple tan coat that had clearly seen several winters. Her dark blonde hair was tied back in a loose ponytail. The boy's sneakers splashed through shallow puddles as he pointed excitedly toward something ahead. They looked ordinary, completely ordinary. Yet somehow their presence felt startling against the gray loneliness surrounding him. Ethan watched them for only a moment before looking away again. He didn't know it yet, but the next few minutes would quietly change everything he thought he knew about loss, family, and the strange ways life sometimes sends hope back when you've stopped looking for it. The little boy was the first to reach the row of graves near Ethan's bench. He stopped suddenly, clutching the bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums against his jacket, and looked around with the wide-eyed curiosity only children seemed capable of carrying into places meant for mourning. Rain dotted his brown hair. He did not appear bothered by it. Behind him, the young woman followed at a slower pace, carefully stepping around puddles while balancing a canvas tote bag against her shoulder. She looked tired in the way many hardworking people did. Not dramatic exhaustion, not the kind that drew sympathy, just the quiet fatigue of someone carrying responsibilities every day without complaint. Ethan glanced away, intending to return to his thoughts, but the boy's voice carried through the rain. "Mom, do you think Grandma can still see the flowers?" The woman smiled softly. "I think she sees every flower we bring, even the cheap ones." The question was so earnest that Ethan almost laughed despite himself. The woman crouched beside the child and adjusted his scarf. "Especially the cheap ones," she said, "because those are the ones we worked hardest to buy." The boy seemed satisfied with that answer. Together they continued down the path until they reached a modest gray headstone several yards away. Ethan watched from a distance without meaning to. The woman brushed rainwater from the stone with her sleeve before placing her hand against it. Her expression changed immediately. The smile disappeared. Grief settled across her face with familiar ease. Ethan recognized that look. People who had never lost someone important imagined grief arrived like a storm and eventually passed. They were wrong. Grief became furniture. It stayed in the room forever. You simply learned how to walk around it. The boy carefully arranged the flowers at the base of the grave. Then he sat cross-legged on the wet grass and began talking to the headstone as if speaking to a friend. The woman listened quietly. Ethan could not hear every word, only fragments carried by the wind. Stories about school, a spelling test, a soccer game, a missing tooth, ordinary things, the kind of things families shared around dinner tables. For reasons he could not explain, the sound made the cemetery feel less cold. A few minutes later, the boy stood and pointed toward a flock of birds crossing the gray sky. "Look, Mom." She followed his finger and smiled again. For a brief moment, the sadness in her eyes lifted. Ethan looked down at the second coffee cup beside Abigail's grave. 3 years. 3 years of visiting every Sunday. 3 years of silence. 3 years of conversations with someone who could no longer answer. Across the cemetery, that child was talking to his grandmother as naturally as if she were standing beside him. Somehow that felt healthier than anything Ethan had done since Abigail died. He leaned back against the bench and closed his eyes. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. Abigail laughing in their kitchen on a snowy morning. Flower on her cheek. Music playing through a small speaker. She had been making pancakes. He had been answering emails. She had taken his laptop, closed it, and said, "One day you are going to regret spending more time with work than with people." At the time, he had rolled his eyes. Now the memory felt like a message arriving years too late. Ethan opened his eyes again. The woman was gathering her things. The boy picked up the empty flower wrapper and stuffed it into his pocket. No litter. No shortcuts. Small acts of responsibility. The kind Abigail always admired. They started walking back toward the cemetery entrance. Ethan assumed they would pass without noticing him. Instead, the boy's gaze landed directly on the bench. He slowed, then stopped. His eyes moved from Ethan to the second coffee cup sitting beside the grave. Children noticed details adults ignored. The boy tilted his head. Curiosity flickered across his face. Before his mother could guide him onward, he took a few steps toward Ethan. The rain continued falling softly around them. And for the first time in 3 years, a stranger was about to interrupt the loneliness Ethan Caldwell had built around himself like a wall. The boy stopped only a few feet from the bench and looked at Ethan with the fearless honesty children carried before the world taught them caution. For several seconds he said nothing. His eyes moved from Ethan to the headstone, then to the untouched coffee cup resting beside it. Finally he pointed. "Who was the second coffee for?" The question caught Ethan off guard. Adults rarely asked about the second cup. Most people avoided conversations about grief because they did not know what to say. Children were different. They simply asked what they saw. Ethan followed the boy's gaze. "My wife," he answered quietly. The boy nodded as if that made perfect sense. "Does she like coffee?" Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. "She loved coffee." The child smiled. "My grandma liked hot chocolate." Behind him, Claire approached with an apologetic expression. "Noah, do not bother people." "I am not bothering him," Noah replied. "We are talking." Ethan expected the woman to pull her son away immediately, but instead she paused. Her eyes briefly met his. There was kindness there. Not curiosity, not pity, just simple kindness. I am sorry, she said. He asks questions before he thinks about whether he should. Noah frowned. You told me questions are how people learn. Claire sighed. That is not helping your case. To Ethan's surprise, a small laugh escaped him. It was brief, rusty, unfamiliar. The sound seemed to surprise everyone, including himself. Noah noticed immediately. See, Mom? He needed that. Claire shook her head, embarrassed. Please ignore him. But Ethan found himself looking at the child instead. Needed what? Noah shrugged. A smile. The answer landed harder than it should have. Ethan looked away toward Abigail's grave. For a moment no one spoke. Rain tapped softly against leaves overhead. Somewhere in the distance a church bell echoed through the gray afternoon. Claire shifted the tote bag on her shoulder. Come on, Noah. We should get going. I still have to stop by the grocery store before work. Ethan glanced back. You work on Sundays? Claire smiled faintly. Double shifts sometimes. Where? The question slipped out before he could stop it. Bennett's Bakery during the mornings. Then a diner a few miles away in the evenings. Noah groaned dramatically. Mom makes the best cinnamon rolls, but she never keeps any for us. Claire laughed. Because customers pay for them. That is not fair. That is business. Noah crossed his arms. Then I do not like business. Ethan almost smiled again. Almost. The conversation should have ended there. They were strangers. Their lives existed in completely different worlds. Yet neither Claire nor Noah seemed interested in who he was. They saw a man sitting alone in the rain. Nothing more. Nothing less. Noah suddenly looked at the headstone again. Do you come here every week? Ethan hesitated. Every Sunday. For 3 years. The boy's eyes widened. That is a lot of Sundays. Ethan nodded slowly. Yes, it is. Noah looked thoughtful for a moment. Then he asked the question that changed everything. If you come here every week, who takes care of you the rest of the time? Silence followed. Even the rain seemed quieter. Ethan stared at the child. No board member had ever asked that question. No journalist. No friend. No employee. Because everyone assumed a billionaire had everything. Noah did not see money. He saw a man sitting alone beside a grave. Claire gently touched her son's shoulder. That is enough questions. But Noah continued staring at Ethan. Waiting. Ethan opened his mouth to answer and realized he did not have one. The truth was uncomfortable. No one took care of him. Not really. Assistants managed his calendar. Lawyers handled his contracts. Executives ran meetings. Staff maintained his homes. Yet every night he returned to an empty house where nobody asked if he had eaten dinner. Nobody noticed if he slept. Nobody cared whether he was happy. Claire seemed to recognize something in his expression. Something fragile. Something hidden. She looked at the second coffee cup, then at the lonely bench, then back at him. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle enough to be mistaken for the rain itself. Sir, she said softly, do you need a family today? The question settled into the air between them and seemed to linger there. Ethan stared at Claire, certain he had heard her incorrectly. In boardrooms, people asked him for investments. Reporters asked for interviews. Attorneys asked for signatures. Strangers asked for favors. No one had ever asked if he needed a family. Not once. Especially not like this. Not without an agenda. Not without knowing his name. Claire immediately looked embarrassed. A faint blush colored her cheeks despite the cold rain. I am sorry, she said quickly. That sounded strange. Noah looked up at her. It did not sound strange. Thank you for your opinion, Claire replied. You are welcome, Noah answered. Ethan found himself staring at the small family in front of him. There was something disarming about them. They did not seem intimidated. They did not seem impressed. They did not even seem particularly interested in him. Claire was focused on making sure Noah zipped his jacket properly. Noah was focused on avoiding puddles. Their attention belonged entirely to each other. The realization struck Ethan unexpectedly. He could not remember the last time someone had looked at him without wanting something. Claire finally met his eyes again. What I meant was, she hesitated, searching for the right words. Nobody should have to sit alone in the rain if they do not want to. Ethan looked away toward Abigail's grave. For a moment he could not speak. The cemetery blurred slightly through the falling rain. Somewhere deep inside, a memory surfaced. Abigail standing on their back porch years ago during a thunderstorm, holding 2 mugs of coffee, smiling at him. She had always hated seeing anyone alone. Once, she had invited an elderly neighbor to Thanksgiving dinner because she noticed his lights were off every holiday. Another year, she had organized gifts for children at a shelter instead of buying expensive presents for herself. Her kindness had embarrassed him sometimes. It had also been one of the things he loved most about her. Claire's voice carried the same quiet warmth. Not identical, but familiar enough to ache. Ethan swallowed hard. Families do not work like that. Claire tilted her head slightly. Like what? You cannot simply offer one to a stranger. Before Claire could answer, Noah spoke first. Sure you can. Ethan looked at him. Noah shrugged. My mom shares everything. Not everything, Claire said. Most things, Noah corrected. Ethan shook his head. It is not that simple. Maybe not, Claire admitted. But kindness usually starts simple. The words followed another brief silence. Rain tapped against the umbrella beside the bench. A cold breeze moved through the cemetery. Claire checked the time on an inexpensive watch. Her expression shifted immediately. Concern replaced warmth. Oh no, Noah groaned. What? We are late. For what? Life. Noah sighed dramatically. Life is always making us late. Ethan almost laughed again. Claire offered him an apologetic smile. I have to get him home and then head to work. She adjusted the tote bag on her shoulder. It was nice meeting you. Meeting you. The phrase felt strangely important, as if they had actually met instead of merely crossed paths. Noah took a few steps backward before stopping. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something folded. Wait. He hurried back toward the bench. Ethan watched as the boy carefully placed a small piece of paper beside the second coffee cup. What is this? Ethan asked. A reminder. Noah smiled. Mom says reminders help people. Claire looked confused. I did not know you had paper. I found it in your bag. That is concerning. Noah ignored her. Ethan unfolded the paper. Written in large, uneven letters was a simple sentence. Nobody should be alone all the time. Ethan stared at the words. Something tightened painfully in his chest. When he finally looked up, Claire and Noah were already walking away through the rain. The boy waved once before turning toward the cemetery gate. Ethan remained on the bench long after they disappeared. The rain continued falling. The coffee beside Abigail's grave had gone cold. Yet for the first time in 3 years, the silence around him felt different. Not smaller. Not healed. Just interrupted. And somehow that tiny interruption followed him all the way home. The drive home took nearly 40 minutes. Ethan barely noticed. The windshield wipers moved steadily across the glass while the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white beyond the rain. The folded note from Noah rested on the passenger seat beside him. Nobody should be alone all the time. Such a simple sentence. Written in uneven handwriting by a child who probably had no idea what those words had done to a stranger. Ethan had spent years surrounded by people. Thousands of employees. Hundreds of business partners. Countless meetings. Yet the note felt more personal than any conversation he had experienced in a very long time. By the time he pulled into the underground garage beneath his Manhattan penthouse, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The security staff greeted him respectfully. He nodded without really hearing them. The elevator carried him 63 floors upward in complete silence. When the doors opened, the familiar emptiness greeted him. The penthouse was immaculate. Every surface polished. Every light perfectly placed. Every piece of furniture chosen by world-class designers. It looked like the cover of an architecture magazine. It felt like nobody lived there. Ethan loosened his tie and stepped into the kitchen. Out of habit, he reached for 2 plates before stopping himself. His hand remained suspended above the cabinet for several seconds. Then he slowly lowered it. 3 years later, the reflex still remained. Some habits belong to love. They did not disappear simply because the person did. He prepared a simple dinner and carried it to the dining table. 1 plate, 1 glass, 1 chair occupied. The room seemed larger than usual. Across from him sat an empty seat that nobody had touched in years. Ethan tried eating. After a few bites, he pushed the plate away. His appetite vanished. The silence felt heavier tonight. Not because he was alone, because someone had pointed it out. His gaze drifted toward the folded paper on the counter. Finally he stood, walked over, and picked it up again. Nobody should be alone all the time. He read the sentence 3 times. 4. 5. Then he laughed softly at himself. A billionaire CEO being emotionally affected by a note written in crayon. Abigail would have found that hilarious. The thought stopped him cold. Abigail. Slowly, Ethan crossed the living room and approached a bookshelf near the fireplace. Hidden among business awards and framed photographs sat a small wooden box. He had not opened it in months, perhaps longer. His fingers hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside were dozens of keepsakes, old movie tickets, vacation photographs, birthday cards, tiny fragments of a life that once felt permanent. Resting near the bottom was a folded piece of paper. Ethan recognized it instantly. Abigail's handwriting. He carefully unfolded it. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. He had memorized every word years ago. Yet tonight he read it again. When grief makes you cruel, find someone kind enough to embarrass you back into being human. Ethan stared at the sentence. His chest tightened. The memory returned immediately. Abigail had written it after an argument nearly 10 years earlier. Ethan had become obsessed with work during a difficult merger. He had started treating people like obstacles instead of human beings. She had slipped the note into his briefcase. At the time, he had laughed. Tonight, the words felt different. Kind enough to embarrass you back into being human. Claire's face appeared in his mind. Then Noah's. Their worn coats. Their grocery store flowers. Their ordinary kindness. They had not known who he was. They had simply seen someone hurting and stopped to care. The realization unsettled him. It also warmed something inside him that had been cold for years. A notification suddenly appeared on his phone. Monday's executive schedule. 8 meetings. 2 investor calls. 1 acquisition review. Endless obligations waiting for him in the morning. Ethan looked at the screen for a long moment before locking it again. For the first time in years, those meetings felt strangely unimportant. His attention returned to Noah's note, then to Abigail's letter. 2 messages, written years apart by 2 completely different people. Yet somehow they carried the same truth. Ethan walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Thousands of lights stretched into the darkness below. Millions of people, millions of separate lives. Somewhere out there, a single mother was probably finishing a long shift at work. Somewhere, a little boy was getting ready for bed. And without understanding why, Ethan found himself wondering if he would ever see them again. Monday arrived with clear skies and sharp autumn sunlight reflecting from the glass towers of Manhattan. By 8 o'clock, Ethan sat at the head of a conference table overlooking the city. 12 executives waited for his decision on a proposed acquisition worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Charts covered the screens. Financial projections filled thick folders. Normally, Ethan would have dissected every detail with ruthless precision. Today, his attention drifted. A senior executive clicked to the next slide. The Riverside redevelopment project is expected to increase annual revenue by approximately 18%. Ethan glanced at the rendering on the screen. Several aging apartment buildings would be demolished. Luxury retail spaces would replace them. Investors loved the proposal. The numbers were impressive, yet something about the image bothered him. How many residents currently live there? He asked. The room fell quiet. The executive blinked. Approximately 300 units. And where are they supposed to go? Another pause. Relocation assistance will be provided according to legal requirements. Ethan stared at the screen. Legal requirements. The phrase felt cold, efficient, empty. For years he would have accepted that answer without hesitation. Today he found himself thinking about Claire carrying grocery bags after a double shift. About Noah proudly delivering cheap flowers to his grandmother's grave. About ordinary people whose lives never appeared inside corporate presentations. The meeting continued, but the unease remained. 2 hours later, Ethan stepped out of the boardroom and into his private office. His assistant immediately approached. You have an investor call in 15 minutes and a lunch meeting at noon. Ethan nodded automatically. Then his eyes landed on the note resting inside his desk drawer. Nobody should be alone all the time. He looked at it for several seconds before making a decision that surprised even him. Cancel lunch. His assistant blinked. Cancel it. Reschedule. May I ask why? Ethan grabbed his coat. I need to go somewhere. 40 minutes later, a black sedan stopped outside Bennett's Bakery. The small neighborhood shop sat between a dry cleaner and a hardware store. Nothing about it suggested importance. The sign above the door had faded slightly from years of sunlight. The display window featured handwritten specials instead of digital screens. Ethan stood on the sidewalk for a moment before entering. A bell chimed overhead. Warm air wrapped around him immediately. The scent of cinnamon, fresh bread, and coffee filled the room. Customers occupied several small tables near the windows. Behind the counter, Claire balanced 2 trays of pastries while helping an elderly customer choose between blueberry muffins and apple turnovers. She looked just as tired as she had in the cemetery, yet she smiled at everyone who entered. Ethan watched unnoticed for a moment. There was no audience here, no publicity, no advantage to her kindness. It was simply who she was. Finally, Claire looked up. Recognition appeared instantly. Her eyes widened slightly. You. Ethan almost smiled. Me. Claire handed a pastry box to a customer before stepping closer. I did not expect to see you again. Neither did I. She glanced toward the menu board. Would you like coffee? Ethan looked around the bakery. Families shared tables. Construction workers stopped in for lunch. A young mother bounced a baby on her knee while reading a book. The room felt alive in a way his penthouse never did. Actually, he said, I was hoping to buy one of those famous cinnamon rolls your son told me about. Claire laughed softly. The sound was warm enough to make several customers smile without knowing why. Noah talks too much. He gets that from someone. Claire shook her head. Definitely not me. For the first time in years, Ethan found himself looking forward to a conversation. He still had not told her who he was. And somehow that made this moment feel more honest than anything money had bought him in a very long time. Claire disappeared into the kitchen and returned a few minutes later carrying a large cinnamon roll on a white plate. The pastry was still warm. Thin ribbons of icing glistened beneath the bakery lights. She placed it in front of Ethan along with a fresh cup of coffee. Careful, she said. The cinnamon rolls have a reputation. Ethan raised an eyebrow. A reputation? People come in planning to buy 1 and leave with 6. Sounds dangerous. For diets, absolutely. He took a bite and immediately understood. The cinnamon, butter, and vanilla blended into something that tasted less like a pastry and more like a memory. The kind of food someone made because they cared about the people eating it. Noah was right, he admitted. Claire folded her arms proudly. I will make sure he hears that. A few customers entered the bakery. Claire excused herself to help them, leaving Ethan alone at the small table near the window. He watched her move through the room. She remembered names, asked about sick relatives, checked on a customer recovering from surgery. She seemed connected to everyone around her in ways Ethan could barely remember being connected to anyone. 20 minutes later, the lunch rush began. The bakery filled quickly. Claire moved from register to counter to coffee station without stopping. Despite the growing line, she remained patient. Then the front door burst open. Noah hurried inside, carrying a backpack almost as large as he was. Mom, Claire glanced up. School ended an hour ago. Why are you here? Mrs. Turner had an appointment. Noah stopped when he noticed Ethan. His face immediately brightened. Coffee, grave got. Several customers turned toward Ethan. Claire covered her face with one hand. Noah. What? That is how I know him. Ethan laughed. A real laugh this time. Noah dropped into the chair across from him without hesitation. Did you stop being lonely? The directness nearly made Ethan choke on his coffee. Claire rushed over carrying a tray. Noah, you cannot ask people that. Why not? Because it is personal. Noah considered this carefully. Okay. He turned back to Ethan. You do not have to answer. Ethan shook his head. I am still working on it. Noah nodded seriously. That makes sense. Claire handed Noah a sandwich. Eat. The boy obeyed for almost 30 seconds before speaking again. Mom says healing takes time. Ethan looked toward Claire. She seemed embarrassed. I say a lot of things. Most of them are correct, Noah replied. A shadow crossed Claire's expression. It appeared so quickly Ethan almost missed it. She glanced toward the bakery office where several envelopes sat stacked on a desk. Her smile faded for a fraction of a second before returning. Everything okay? Ethan asked quietly. Claire hesitated. Just grown-up problems. Noah lowered his sandwich. The apartment thing? Claire's eyes widened. Noah. What? Not now. Ethan noticed the tension immediately. The easy warmth vanished from her posture. She looked tired again. More than tired. Worried. Noah seemed to realize he had said something he should not have. He stared down at his sandwich. Claire forced a smile and returned to helping customers. Ethan watched her for several moments. The envelopes on the office desk remained visible from where he sat. One had bright red lettering stamped across the front. Final notice. His stomach tightened unexpectedly. Half an hour later, Claire walked a customer to the door. As she returned, her manager emerged from the office carrying a folder. The man's expression was serious. "Claire, can I speak with you?" She nodded. The two disappeared into the office. The door closed behind them. Through the glass, Ethan could see the manager speaking while pointing toward paperwork on the desk. Claire listened quietly. Her shoulders slowly slumped. Something was wrong. Very wrong. 5 minutes later, she emerged holding the folder tightly against her chest. Her smile was gone. Noah noticed immediately. "Mom." Claire knelt beside him and brushed a hand through his hair. "Everything is fine." But Ethan recognized that look. He had seen it in employees facing layoffs, in families facing impossible choices. It was the expression of someone trying to protect others from a problem she had not yet figured out how to solve. And for reasons he could not explain, seeing that look on Claire Bennett's face bothered him far more than it should have. The bakery closed at 6 o'clock. The last customer left carrying a box of pastries, and the warm noise that had filled the room throughout the afternoon slowly faded away. Chairs were stacked. Counters were wiped clean. The scent of cinnamon still lingered in the air. Ethan remained seated near the window longer than he intended. Part of him knew he should return to the endless responsibilities waiting downtown. Another part was unwilling to leave. Claire emerged from the office carrying the same folder. The strain on her face had become harder to hide. She moved carefully, as if carrying something fragile. Noah sat at a corner table finishing homework while occasionally drawing rockets in the margins of his notebook. Children always seemed able to create joy in places adults filled with worry. Ethan watched Claire lock the cash register. Finally, he stood. "Everything really is not fine, is it?" Claire paused. For a second, she considered giving the polite answer, the safe answer. Then she looked toward Noah and sighed softly. "No, it is not." Ethan waited. She glanced at the folder. The building owner sold the property. The bakery? Claire nodded. The bakery. The apartments upstairs. The entire block. Ethan felt a strange sensation settle in his stomach. What happens now? The new owners want everyone out within 60 days. She attempted a smile that did not quite succeed. Apparently, luxury redevelopment is very popular these days. Ethan looked down at the folder. "And you live here? 2 floors above the bakery. With Noah?" "Yes." The silence that followed felt heavier than any boardroom conversation. Ethan had seen projects like this his entire career. Numbers on spreadsheets. Property values. Market opportunities. He had never sat across from someone whose entire life fit inside those numbers. Claire lowered her voice. "I will figure something out." Ethan noticed she said it the way people repeated difficult truths to themselves. Not because they believed them, because they needed to. Noah looked up from his homework. "Mom says that every time something bad happens." Claire laughed softly. "Noah, it is true." He closed his notebook. "She also says we are not quitting." Ethan looked at the boy. "And what do you say?" Noah thought seriously about the question. "I say Grandma would tell us to keep going." Claire's eyes glistened for a moment. She quickly looked away. Ethan recognized that look. Hope mixed with exhaustion. Determination mixed with fear. It reminded him of Abigail. Not because they were the same person. They were not. But because both women seemed to carry other people before carrying themselves. The front door suddenly opened. A cold breeze swept through the bakery. A man in an expensive suit stepped inside, holding a leather portfolio. He looked around before approaching Claire. "Miss Bennett." Claire immediately straightened. "Yes. I am with the redevelopment group." The warmth disappeared from the room. Noah lowered his pencil. Claire's shoulders tightened. "Can I help you?" The man opened the portfolio. "We are scheduling final resident meetings. Compensation packages will be reviewed next week." Claire accepted the papers without speaking. "Thank you. The process should be straightforward." He smiled professionally. "Most residents understand the opportunity." Opportunity. Ethan felt irritation flash through him. The man saw buildings. Claire saw home. The difference suddenly seemed enormous. After the representative left, silence settled over the bakery once again. Claire stared at the documents. Noah stared at Claire. Ethan stared at both of them. Then his eyes landed on the company logo printed at the top of the paperwork. The logo he knew better than his own signature. Caldwell Urban Development. His company. His project. His decision. For a moment the room seemed to tilt. The redevelopment proposal from this morning. The residents. The relocation notices. The bakery. Claire. Noah. All of it connected in an instant. Ethan looked at the folder in Claire's hands and felt something he had not experienced in years. Shame. Because the problem threatening the only people who had shown him kindness in 3 years carried his own name on the paperwork. Claire followed his gaze toward the paperwork and misread the expression on his face. "Do not worry," she said quietly. "You do not have to say anything." Ethan looked up. The bakery lights reflected against the windows as evening settled over the street outside. For a moment, he saw two versions of himself. The man who had spent years measuring success through profits and growth, and the man sitting inside a small bakery with a single mother and her son, realizing that numbers on reports always belong to real people. Noah climbed down from his chair and walked over to Claire. Without a word, he slipped his hand into hers. The gesture was simple, natural, automatic, yet it struck Ethan harder than any business lesson he had learned in decades. Family, not a title, not a possession, a daily choice to stand beside someone. Ethan took a slow breath. "Claire," she looked at him. "There is something I should tell you." Before he could continue, his phone rang. The caller identification displayed the name of his chief operating officer. Ethan answered. "What is it?" The voice on the other end sounded urgent. "The board wants final approval on the redevelopment project tonight. Investors are waiting." Ethan stared at the documents in Claire's hands. The silence stretched. "Cancel the approval." There was a pause. "Sir, cancel it." Another pause. Longer this time. "That will create significant complications." Ethan looked at Noah standing beside his mother. He remembered Abigail's note. "Find someone kind enough to embarrass you back into being human. Then we will deal with the complications," he said. "The project is suspended until further review." He ended the call before anyone could argue. Claire looked confused. "What project?" Ethan lowered his phone. The moment had finally arrived. "The one listed on those papers." Her brow furrowed. "How would you know that?" Ethan glanced at the company logo, then back at her. "Because it is my company." The room became completely still. Claire stared at him. Noah stared at him. Even the sound of traffic outside seemed distant. "Your company?" Claire repeated. Ethan nodded. "My name is Ethan Caldwell." Recognition slowly appeared in her eyes. She had seen the name before. On news articles, business reports, building signs across the city. Shock crossed her face. Then disbelief. Then something unexpected. Not anger. Disappointment. "You knew?" she asked quietly. "Not at first. But later?" Ethan nodded again. "Yes." Claire looked away. For several seconds, she said nothing. Noah finally broke the silence. "Wait." He pointed at Ethan. "You are the coffee grave guy and the company guy?" Ethan almost smiled. Apparently. Noah considered this information carefully. "That is a lot of jobs." Claire could not help laughing despite herself. The tension softened. Only slightly. But enough. Ethan stepped closer. "I cannot change the last 3 years. I cannot change every decision I made. But I can change this one." Claire searched his face, trying to determine whether he meant it. "Why?" Ethan thought about the cemetery, the flowers, the note, the coffee cup beside Abigail's grave. "Because someone reminded me that people matter more than projects." Weeks later, the announcement made headlines across New York. The redevelopment plan was canceled. Instead, Caldwell Industries invested in restoring the neighborhood. Affordable apartments were renovated. Small businesses received support. The bakery remained exactly where it belonged. At the center of the project stood a new community building named Abigail House, a place designed for working families, single parents, and elderly residents who needed support. On opening day, sunlight filled the courtyard. Children ran across the grass. Neighbors gathered around picnic tables. Claire stood beside Noah near the entrance. Ethan joined them. Noah looked up at the building's name and then at Ethan. "Is this for your wife?" Ethan nodded. "Yes." Noah smiled. "Then she still helps people." Ethan felt emotion rise unexpectedly in his chest. "She does." The boy thought for a moment. Then he asked the same kind of question that had changed everything months earlier. "Does she have a family again now?" Ethan looked around. At the families laughing together. At the community filling the courtyard. At Claire standing beside him. At Noah grinning beneath the afternoon sun. For the first time in years, the answer felt easy. "I think she does," he said softly. And as the lights came on inside Abigail House and the sound of happy voices filled the air, Ethan realized something important. He had gone to a cemetery carrying flowers for someone he lost. He never expected to find a reason to live there again.